Thaddeus and Tarquinus stood in the palatial entryway to the administratum offices, one of the many, many buildings of its kind in this region. The sheened marble floors, the high Gothic architecture above, the statuary, paintings, frescoes that cover the walls, all into one word, one impression: power. When they walked in, it was like the parting of the seas. Every servitor, scribe, menial, and official gave them a wide berth. The icons of the Inquisition they wore were like a talisman that warded off the usual gaggle of questions and interruptions that all else who walked inside were subjected to. As always, Tarquinus was wide-eyed and beaming, taking in the splendor and complexity of the vista, all it was and all it meant. And so it was that he began to look up at the ceiling, to the things that were moving around in the space between. Scores of skulls floated one way or another, always silvered metal, always with small protrusions, some with a scrawny metallic arm to help them manipulate things, some with just vox grills at the front, some far more complicated still. Tarquinus was watching one in particular as it wended its way through the air. He turned around to look at his master, the old inquisitor called the Thaddeus, only to see that he too was watching the very self-same floating skull. "Master, is that Servo Skull... well, is it bouncing jauntily?" "What? What, the weird one?" said Thaddeus. "I could swear its movements remind me of the beats of a song, like it's humming to itself in movement form." "I don't know, but look at it." They both watched the skull, as it did indeed seem to be more bobbing along than flying. It was indeed strange, as when it burst through a collection of other skulls floating past it, it was confronted with the sight of the cherubs that circled the highest point just below the lavishly painted ceiling. The skull seemed to shake a bit and then changed altitude and speed, clearly avoiding the strange childlike beings that floated there, playing harps and singing exaltations to the Emperor. Well, more blaring them from speakers, one should say, really. But to many it would seem surreal. But it should not have seemed so to a supposedly lobotomized anti-gravitic-powered floating head. The two watched on in stunned silence as it made its way into one of the least populated alleys and carried on its path. The Inquisitor said, "What's it doing? Did it just avoid the cherubs?" "It certainly seemed so. Let's follow it, just to be sure," said Tarquinus. "Holy throne, yes. This is exciting," said Thaddeus. The two wandered after the Servo Skull down the many corridors it passed on its journey. At points it would leave it a few seconds to turn a corner. The skull seemed to be looking behind itself every now and again, now that it was out of the main building area and clearly moving to a disused or derelict space. But it seemed almost furtive now. Something that made the two inquisitors, one the master and one the learner, look at each other and raise their eyebrows more than once. It floated along now more quickly, heading into an old room. It seemed to be an old library when Thaddeus and Tarquinus walked to its doors, peering through the circles of glass in at the clandestine scene before them. The two watched on as the little skull took down books, seemed to scan them, and then, once selected, it would take them around a corner just out of sight, returning again and again for different sizes and colours of books, codices, and parchments. "Now what's it doing?" whispered Thaddeus. Tarquinus just shrugged dramatically, his eyebrows practically joining his hairline, he was so perplexed. The small Servo Skull that went to a line of boxes above the shelves and seemed to take out small pieces one at a time, and then hover to its hiding place around a corner. Back and forth it came again and again. At this point, it came back one last time for a container that seemed to rattle as it was moved. As the two men stood there, they began to hear low music coming from the room now, dramatic music. Then they heard the sound of something clattering, small things being thrown across the floor again and again. Thaddeus then pushed slowly and gently at the door, and both he and Tarquinus moved stealthily inside. Round the dusty shelves of books they moved, until they could see the secret spectacle. All of the previously gathered books and items were arranged to show a huge landscape, each book chosen for its color and size. The Servo Skull had made a perfect reflection of the streets outside the building. The two watched as the Servo Skull had set up military figurines from epochs untold, the small things that it had collected from the containers above the shelves. It began to pipe out even more dramatic music, low but constantly. Then it proceeded to get out squares of wood with dots on them, differing numbers on each side. It would then fill a small cup with them, then swing back and float at it at speed, knocking over the cup, and the squares would fall out across the floor. The Servo Skull would then quickly put them into two piles, seemingly to be differentiated by the number of dots on the side that was facing upwards. It would then roll them again, and then again. Each time the pool of squares placed in the cup was smaller. Eventually, the small skull would then move whip-like into the air and circle down towards the figures like a spectre of death, and fly above the scene and take off some of the figurines one at a time. This went on for a couple of hours, both men transfixed by the odd performance they witnessed. At the conclusion of what was clearly some form of reenacted battle, the skull then took out all of the pieces that it had played with, and arranged them as if in an amphitheatre, he on its stage. It then slowly pivoted so it could make direct eye contact with each model in a sweeping pass, and then it began to speak. Welcome, gentle listeners. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and important features of the Warhammer 40k universe. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. I would like to thank you all for your participation in this most excellent battle. Now, who was our MVP? Let us vote. You decide. As it chanted on, the two inquisitors slowly withdrew, walking to the doors and through them in an utter daze. The two voyeurs turned their heads and looked at each other dumbfounded. Both slowly shrugged almost in unison, then left in a daze. No. Shouldn't we, tell someone? Oh, no. I'm not touching this with a battle barge. It's not a demon, witch, cultist, or devil. We have no horse in this race. Gotcha. Let's go. Yeah, let's. They did not have to say it. It was implicit. They would never relay it to others, nor speak of it for the rest of their lives. For truth be told, who would believe them? Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant. All I can say is that today will be a change from the norm, as there is no law, as I have to admit to being a bit overwhelmed. I have been working potentially too hard, in hopes of reaching a point where I can feel secure to take a bit of a break, and this point has now been reached. For yesterday, we managed, somehow, to gain a congregation of over 100,000 souls next to our little fireside. A landmark to be sure, but this is not an exercise in ego. It is a sad admittance of a defeatist perspective I wish to warn some against falling into. For being on YouTube as a content creator can be an odd thing to do. For one can see subscriptions rise and fall, hits rise and fall, never quite knowing what went wrong, what went well, and what one can do to best improve. And it adds up to an ongoing feeling, an elicited fear reaction that at any time your channel can plummet or simply disappear. I am a known worrier, so this constant fear has been at the base of many of my frantic times when I put out a lot of content. But please also encompass that I was always also labouring under the assumption that many would still be under circumstances that meant that they may be crying out for some light-hearted, easily consumed distractions to while away some potentially very stressful days. But now, with this number, I finally feel that perhaps I am at least headed in the right direction, and that I can now take a tiny break. To recharge, to take stock, to celebrate, and then to do what I have wanted to do for quite some time, and that will be to put on the brakes and try to work more intelligently, instead of merely putting in more and more hours to make up for my woeful inadequacies. Hence after today I shall be taking that time. Firstly, to recharge, as stated, but then to learn, to try to improve, and to write up some of the adventures and plot out at least the initial stages of the campaign at Abundance Tertius that I have been threatening for nearly a year now. So I shall be correlating my many tales and arranging them into long compilations. Hopefully, some may well like them, and this might keep the channel alive. Hopefully, many will like them so that they are up to date on my little tales when we enter the next phase. For I do intend to do better if I can. I will learn my packages better, attempt to find the artist and attribute them, include more votes and ways to help forge the narratives, but also to get people to assist in the direction of the channel. For I feel that the success we have managed has only been possible due to the guidance and support of the community. Basically, you. I truly do listen. Now many might say, Balders, surely you knew this was coming, and that you should have had a whopper in the bank ready to drop. Well, the sad truth is that the effort to get here, the complexity of the recent issues with YouTube, and stripping subs from many channels, meant that I did not think it would be this soon, and when it looked that it would be, I simply did not have the energy and time or the muse to create something that I thought would match the faith you have all placed in this channel, and the mad witterings I put out with the support of Mrs. B. So I shall take this time off and then come back to you with what I sincerely hope is the sort of spectacle you should expect for all of your support, patience and devotion to this silly old sod. Now, to the obligatory thank you section. I cannot tell you how many people should be on this list, but will try to curtail it, as I do not want to drown you all in tedium. So let us begin. Aboard a Prince, a fantastic channel and the first one to have me on as a guest. A train wreck of an interview-style chat, if I'm honest, where my mic died and I was so nervous I could barely speak. On a lot of painkillers, I doubt that I made any sense. Hilarious now, but hell at the time. But a shout out to ABP for this opportunity, and for his constant support thereafter. Alpha Busser of If the Emperor Had a Text-to-Speech Device, and to Oculus Imperialis, for reaching out with some advice and very early recognition and acceptance for a non-entity in a field packed with talent. I was more than surprised, I can assure you, and did think for quite some time with both cases it was a bit of a wheeze. To Michael and Remleys, that's Tactica Imperialis and 40k Theories, for having me on their show. Twice now. I like to think it's like a school playground monitor being invited to a meal with Oxford Dons, so both invites were a bit of a surprise, I can tell you. To those who have worked with me or been simply there to talk to or to enjoy their content, Gersh and the Alchemist of One Mind Syndicate, Wolf Lord Rowe, Kirioth, Sleepy Sack, Steve06, Dave from MiniWargaming.com. The list does go on. I'm still bowled over a bit. My closest friends on this platform, the Grimdark Narrator, Nathan of the Great Book of Grudges, the inimitable Chapter Master Valrak, and of course, this list would not be complete without the thunder from down under. My adopted YouTube Nevi, the gentleman who really got me my first big break, and welcomed a tiny tiddler onto his show. Of course, I cannot be talking about anyone but the comedian and edgelord himself, Major Kill. Thanks, lad. Do check out their sites, links will be below. Now I am still experiencing horrific internet connection issues, so I'll be making a I Owe You Everything video soon, as a walkthrough and spotlight on the many artists I have used in the construction of the videos. They deserve the respect. But until I can get that done and out, I hope that Mr. Diego Gisbert Lawrence can accept my gratitude on behalf of all of his wonderfully talented, gloriously and hideously imaginative kind, the artists. The art of Warhammer is its soul, and all I ever do is ham-handedly attempt to paint with words what they do with ease and aplomb, with a brush or a pen, a vision. Links will be below for Mr. Lawrence, and there will be plenty more in the future, Now I would urge you to have a look at his site, and you will see some of the most iconic images in Warhammer, but also from the videos on my channel. So if you ever wanted real merchandise, real art, then get on there and buy some. I know I will. But as stated, I hope to do showcases for those who wish to see them, and to offer thanks to the artists who make what all YouTubers do possible. And now, for my final thank yous. I would have quit a long time ago. Never would have gained any traction whatsoever, if it were not for the most magnificent Nick Beer of Idic Beer. He is the head of the Wargamers Unification and has been a constant source of advice, assistance, and even a shoulder to cry on after a kicking. He is the salt of the earth, and I owe him everything. So give him a look. He's a good lad. To my friends, Peter Tep, Piglet the Hairy One, and of course to STC. Lads, thank you for making me continue and helping make the site what it is. And to you, the gentle listeners, who have made all of this possible by listening and liking, sharing, and being such a wonderful community. But finally, it is to my children and Mrs. B. Well, children is not the correct word. Progeny. My son has helped me out with many technical issues. And of course, you have even heard Gremlin Girl, my daughter, do some lines, and I hope she will do more. But it is to Mrs. B I owe all. She was the one who slammed a camera into my hands and made me make that first dreadful review. She was the one who has put up with all of my ups and downs, working through nights, walking around in circles in the garden endlessly, trying to find a story, and being my most stern yet honest critic. She is always right. She has trawled through endless annoying soundtracks to fish out the pearls, which is in fact what I believe is the secret to any of our success. The music. It sets the pace and tone and allows me to do things faster. It is all, and it is down to her that we get what I consider some of the best background music on the internet. Hence it is also why I do not answer questions on that. When your partner spends days on end finding music, then you may not feel so good about passing out the fruits of their labour either. Apologies, but that line will not change. I respect the musicians, of course, and I pay them for the work, but I also respect the hard work of my partner, Mrs. B. If anyone is still listening to this twaddle, then I would ask one last thing. Show your appreciation to the magnificent writers of the Black Library, both past and present. For without them, as someone else is so fond of saying, and rightly so, without the writers and books of the Black Library, we have nothing but lumps of coloured plastic. Thanks, you scrummy lot. I honestly could go on for days, so we'll cut this off now. Just know, I am so very grateful to all of you, the gentle listeners, and those insane enough to be patrons. Thank you so much for everything. Every hit, every comment, every subscription, every like, every guidance and support. I cannot thank you enough. And now, well, you know the words by now, but let's say them anyway, because they truly are so very important. No matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.